Okay, this is a sound check before we kick off, just to see if I've got this video sound coming out okay, and then we'll dive straight into it. Okay. 1 2 1 2. Okay. 1 2 1 2.
Behind.
Okay. 1 2 1 2.
People in this country need to be awakened.
Okay. 1 2 1 2.
People in this country
Right, okay, I'm going to go with that. If it doesn't work, I'll just have to cut the clips in afterwards, which I hope I don't have to do. Because, as all of these people are supposed to have said, Mark Twain, Blaise Pascal, Cicero, you can see them all here. If I have made this letter longer than usual, it's only because I've not had time to make it shorter. So that should be warning if you're planning on tuning into this for the duration. It's going to take as long as it takes. There's a lot to get through, and I shall dive straight in. Now, the title is Greenback's Ham Acting and Chicken and Eggs, Dr. Seuss. And the sound clip test there was, you will see this video here. This is from the movie Being There with Peter Sellers. Very good movie. And I use it as an introduction to this.
Up until this time, he hasn't said anything could be held against him. The mail and telephone response from his appearance on that bird show was the highest they've ever had. And it was 95% proof. The absolute unity to support the president at the time.
That is exactly why I agree with Ben's wishes.
Under the line. We're surrounded by little men who forgot that we enter naked and exit naked, and that no accountant can audit life in our favor.
I look with you, gentlemen. You want to hold on to the presidency. Our one and only chance.
My friends, I have seen they've been treating you mean. My name is Sylvester McMonkey McBean. I know precisely why you're so unhappy, and that I can fix. I'm the fix-it-up chappy. My prices are low, and I work with great speed, and my work is 100% guaranteed. By my new patent process of polar potoxis of the inner subnuclear noosebomb rogoxis, you'll get a star like the star-bellied sneetch for the mere fall. Thank you, thank you.
there you have the Dr. Seuss machine, and effectively that's a story about the Sneetches, the star-bellied Sneetches and the naked Sneetches, and they all decide they want them, then they don't want them, and it's about polarity in arguments and what have you. Now, this is my blog, not the Grub Street Journal, and this William Hogarth etching here, which is on the 1000 Frolly blog, 1000 Frolly PhD, which basically is entitled Credulity, Superstition and Fanaticism. So the links to each of these windows as they come up, I shall put into the description in the video. And by the end of what I'm about to go through, I think you'll see the point, and the point of this talk ultimately is about understanding the money system, imagining what a money system could do in terms of promoting and a return to posterity and the end of the era of increasing precarity. So the start of this story, which, as I said, if I had more time, I would and could make this much shorter, but I figured this was the best way, a sort of a video essay. And starting off, this is the Corbett report. Now, James Corbett has introduced a new item called Solutions Watch, which I think is very good. To propose solutions, obviously one needs to diagnose the problems which those solutions are being offered up for. And the problem which James's two documentary films, How Big Oil Conquered the World, followed by Why Big Oil Conquered the World, I watched yesterday, the evening before and during yesterday. And what follows here looks at a particular question, and it's the question of technocracy. Now, the difference between a technocratic diagnosis of the economic system is quite a different question to a technocratic prescription for the economic system. And it is an economic system which is built on and has been built on the monopoly of big oil and what James calls the oligarchs. And the analysis of what that means is well set out in the film. And there are a number of people who James interviews about the timeline, the history of the Rockefeller family, of Standard Oil, of Chase Manhattan Bank, its merger with JP Morgan, etc. And during that period of time from the 1850s through to today, there have been some key moments in history when things have changed and changed a lot. And the last 2 years seems to be shaping up to be one of those times. And so if we get into the transcript of the second film, which I'm just going to scroll through to here. Right, why Big Oil conquered the world. The how is pretty well documented, and there are different slants on the history that have been written about it, but there's a lot of information there where it's possible to to take a view. So Joe Plummer and Richard Grove are two people that James has interviewed, and there are interesting interviews between James, Richard Grove. There was a recent one when Richard Grove and James discussed the discussion between Luke Radowski and Tim Pool, for instance, which there are links to Richard Grove's website. We're going to come to a few in a minute. He has a site called based on Tragedy and Hope, and there's some interesting interviews which are coming to with John Taylor Gatto rather. And so I haven't got much argument at all with a lot of the historical analysis, a lot of which comes from Carol Quigley and Tragedy and Hope, but also from Skousen and his Naked Capitalist. I'll point you at a dialogue, a three-way dialogue between Quigley, Skousen, and a kind of a moderator. They weren't in the same room, which looks at the points of differences between them, which are actually key. So, where are we now? Patrick Wood, who's done a very interesting interview as well with James Dellingpole, Technocracy Rising, the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. Now, technocracy as a political movement undoubtedly was a thing, and Patrick talks about Hubbard's peak, Hubbard's relationship with the founder of technocracy. There's a guy called Howard Clark, and particularly there is a link to a YouTube video which I'm going to get to here, and this is the here we are, Technocracy full presentation. So let's just get that presentation up. Open link. Okay, and I'm going to take this as my starting point here.
My job is to make college easier because students have a lot of fun.
We want to skip that.
I'm Arlen Peters, and this is the first.
Okay, so the link is in James's excellent show notes and transcript to the whole of those two documentary films. And there is actually a comment here that someone has helpfully put in, which has got the timings on the technocratic criticism or critique of the existing, what they call the price system, and then the debt system. And then they go into their idea of energy measures, energy tokens. Now, they have an allocated money or distributed money, which is actually personal to the person that gets the money. And it's these control freakery type prescriptions leading from the diagnosis, and it's in my opinion, it's one of those cases where the diagnosis is correct, but the prescription is actually in error, or not to everybody's likely best interest, tastes, etc. And this is a key point in how one should analyze a system with respect to the measure of the analysis, because to analyze or measure anything, you have to have a standard unit. And if you read the Technocracy handbook, which I haven't got a copy of, there's one thing they say, and it's echoed in ABC of Economics, I believe, by Ezra Pound, where they say measuring something with a variable is not a very smart thing to do. And money values, prices are variables, okay? And it is that slippery concept of value and price which leads to opportunities for great manipulation of the money which we all rely on to have a complex economy. And what I've been working on and building towards is a particular aspect of how that manipulation of monetary quantities, who gets that money, who gets to exercise the money as claims on wealth, etc. So it's a very complex subject. But suffice to say, I disagree with the technocracy movement as a movement for government, but I actually do think that their scientific approach to analysing the money system is actually pretty solid. The other person who had a similar analytical scientific it was Frederick Soddy, and Frederick Soddy is the guy who said money is the nothing you get for something before you can buy anything, which is, if you think about it, very, very true. Soddy also wrote a poem about kissing circles, which is it was an all-round good egg, was Frederick Soddy, I think, and he was expelled from the academy for his views on money and his writings on money. And it's interesting that his writings, those of the technocracy movement, scientists attracted to it as a problem that wasn't being solved terribly well by the economists. It's an interesting story, and as with the Blaise Pascal's quote about I would have made this letter shorter, there are misinterpreted, miscommunicated, and conflations of prescriptions with diagnoses, circular reasoning, etc. And we'll see these things as we go along. So that's the technocracy video. Then I already played this Dr. Seuss machine, and this is the greenback ham acting. Now, greenbacks were a debt-free money issued by Lincoln during the American Civil War, and it's a time when private bank issued credit or central bank issued credit or credit issued outside of the community body, if you will. Americans' objections to that were first expressed in the Boston Tea Party. And what that was about was that the colonists issued something called colonial scrip, which basically was IOUs exchanged amongst themselves, which meant they didn't use the money minted by King George. And that's how tyrannies tend to be challenged. And there are examples in history of overthrowing or stating a wish to come from under the control of another power. And a very good example of that is Jesus throwing the money changers from the temple. And and that speaks to what's known as the money trilemma, which is that there's an absolute incongruency between the rate of money for international exchange and sovereign currencies for domestic use, and interest rate and exchange policies. And that's a complex question, and one which is particularly pertinent to the petrodollar question and the control of economic growth or prosperity or access to the means of production, etc., through the monetary unit expressed as an energy commodity. Now, the petrodollar is a thing, and the petrodollar came in around 1973 after what's called the OPEC oil shock. James deals with that. He deals with the 1973 Bilderberg meeting, which discussed that. And it's also dealt with in the Bilderberg film by Daniel Estulin. And it's presented in the popular press or the popular hysterical, Freudian slip, historical, what I would call the index of it, the easily recalled sound bite, if you want to sound what like you know what you're talking about, and again, there are competing interpretations, and that's something which I've been working on this for must be, I don't know, it's 4 or 5 years now. And James's 2 documentaries are really very important parts of the picture. And the only reason that I'm going to look at Patrick Wood's interpretation of American pragmatism, of C.S. Pierce, Henry James, and the jump that they make in terms of what pragmatist prescriptions are, if you like, or what pragmatist analysis is, and then some of the prescriptions that come after, which are not the same thing. And so there is a lot of argument based on authority and ad hominem in the present world. It's been ever thus. If you read Schopenhauer's famous book on how to win an argument, Schopenhauer's Evasions, you'll find the playbook for muddying the water or poisoning the well, etc. Now, one of the other problems which I identified the other day with one of my chats with Ranjan, we were trying to find the source of the quote from Carroll Quigley. Was it from Tragedy and Hope, or was it from one of his other books? And so actually reading things in context, finding the context, not only the context in the publication it comes from, but the context of the whole source material, and then the context of the cultural time and how it was understood by the person that wrote it, which is not the same as how it would be understood by someone reading it later that will have access to some new information, but also won't be au fait with some of the information which led to the conclusions that were drawn by the same information at the same time. Now, there's a famous, I think it's Thomas Kuhn quote that says that when you have two people coming to different conclusions about the same set of facts, that's metaphysics. And again, this is Kant is someone that Cato is talking about, and metaphysics as a quote from Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, in which he says that metaphysics used to be the queen of all sciences. So I wrote a poem called Equibus Screams, and in that quote he talks about Ecuba losing her sons, being exiled and penniless, etc. And which is a quote from Ovid. So anyway, that I digress. So a lot of the analysis that Patrick Wood has done, not so much the other two. I've only come across them recently, although I was familiar with the Tragedy and Hope website, which is excellent, but not Richard Grove. And so we're going to encounter these people. I speed read 3 books which Joseph Plummer has written yesterday. So it's important to understand the whole text, context of someone's appreciation of the work of someone else, and a work as monumental as Carroll Quigley's Tragedy and Hope is, it takes it took me probably 2 or 3 months to study it properly, and I did that in 2016, and bit back in before. I used that as the inspiration for my power usury, Hell's Fuel, Man's Oppressor. So just another point on that. I have made a website. It's called Conquest of Dough. I'm still writing a novel called Conquest of Dough, which has a website, Conquest of Money, which is a pun on Peter Kropotkin's book, Conquest of Bread. Kropotkin also wrote another famous book called Mutual Aid, which challenged a number of the misconstructions of Charles Darwin's work, and is both of them are, I would say, essential reading. So that website is here, Conquest of Dough, and I'm just going to play this clip, which appears in a number of movies about these matters. And this is the international banking scene from the movie The International.
Salvini would like to know why the IBBC, a bank, would be purchasing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of missile guidance and control systems from your company.
The IBBC has purchased billions of dollars worth of Silkworm missiles from the People's Republic of China, which they have resold to clients in the Middle East, contingent upon the missiles being equipped with Vulcan guidance systems. My company is one of only 2 in the world which produce the Vulcan.
Who's the other?
Sunay. Ahmed Sunay.
Of Turkish air attack.
But why is the bank committing so much of its capital and resources to the sale of these missiles?
It's a test. Small arms are the only weapons used in 99% of the world's conflicts. And no one has the capacity to manufacture them faster and cheaper than China. What Scarson is attempting to do is to make the IBBC the exclusive broker of Chinese small arms to the Third World. And the missile deal is the gateway transaction.
Yeah, but billions of dollars invested simply to be a broker. There can't be that much profit for them.
No, this is not about making profit from weapon sales. It's about control.
Control the flow of weapons, control the conflict.
No. The IBBC is a bank. Their objective isn't to control the conflict. It's to control the debt that the conflict produces. You see, the real value of a conflict, the true value, is in the debt that it creates. You control the debt, you control everything.
So you control the debt, you control everything. That's about arms dealing. Oil dealing is another example of the same Machiavellian philosophy. So Joe Plummer and his book Trajan Hope 101 goes through a number of things, and I looked at what is said about his solutions to money, and it's effectively competing currencies, and with competing currencies that does the job, and he introduces his part of that, sort of saying, look, pick up a note, whatever denomination, hey, that's money, and says that as a definition of money, that will do. And as a starting point, that gets very complicated very quickly. And the analysis, I would hope, as a starting point, great, but let's develop that further, which hopefully as we go through this, we'll get an idea of how the simple definition of money, of what money is and what money does, can lead to snake oil salesman. And I use the snake oil salesman term, in deference to Devil Bill, or J.D. Rockefeller's father. And then we come to Tragedy Hope and the analysis of John Taylor Gatto there. Just prior to that, there was a quick review of Edward G. Griffin. Edward G. Griffin wrote the Jekyll Island book about the formation of the Federal Reserve. And so there's a whole backstory to the formation of American Central Bank, who controls it, all of that stuff. The Money Masters, which is Bill Still's movie, is very good on those questions. And that history is important in an American context. The history of banking in the US and the history of the banking in Europe and in the United Kingdom goes back a bit further, arguably spurned the emigration to the US. And as Winston Churchill said, it's two countries separated by a common language. We'll come to language gains a bit later. So a lot of the time people are talking at cross purposes, which are kind of cultural artifacts, because Americans, Englishmen, Scotsmen, and Welshmen and Irishmen are very different. In the US, someone from Chicago would be very different to someone from New York. And whilst those two may have more in common with each other than someone, say, from Boise, Idaho or something, the temptation for one size fits all in prescriptions as well as in analysis is a very dangerous thing. And so understanding where the analysis comes from and then looking at viewpoints which may be challenged and have been challenged but haven't been considered. Hilary Putnam is a famous American philosopher who basically he does talk about throwing the baby out with the bath water, a kind of an iconoclasm in ideas when paradigm shifts take place. So anyway, so both excellent summaries. There's one summary on here looking at the censored parts of Tragedy and Hope, stories of its publication, a kind of legendary. Here's Joseph Plummer's 3 PDFs for download: Dishonest Money, Leaving the Illusion, and Tragedy of Hope. And Leaving the Illusion is a novel. So this is a blog which I did on December the 6th, Seeing the Bretton Woods for the Disease, COVID Purpose, and Conquest of Dough. COVID Purpose is a pun on something called Common Purpose, which is an institutional training course which people get sent on, not dissimilar to the Landmark Group and its routings. It's an organization that demonstrates cult-like traits in people who have been through its programs. We should leave it at that. So, in this cartoon here, I claim this land in the name of His Majesty, and the IMF saying, I structurally adjust this land in the name of economic growth. I think that's quite funny. And Bretton Woods is the famous post-Second World War conference which set out the monetary arrangements after the Second World War. Jekyll Island and the Federal Reserve was obviously that was in 1913 and the formation of the Fed. And then you have between those 2 points you have the 1929 crash and the rise of Hitler, stuff like that. And then post Bretton Woods you get to the Nixon shock, and the Nixon shock is where the dollar comes off $35 an ounce gold to a pure fiat currency, and then hot on the heels of the Nixon shock in 73 is the OPEC oil crisis, and my work about an energy-based currency unit. So this is a measurement unit, not a rationing unit. I'll give you money rations, but it's a really important point regarding how, going back to the international clip, controlling the debt via the resource oil, and how that is achieved and how it has been achieved, not only in the period post what's known as the oil shock, but it was also true in the period between 1935 and 1970, before the US did hit its kind of point, its plateau in oil production, I would say. And so that speaks to Hubbard's peak and the idea of the assumed scarcity of oil and the control of oil. The other markets, things like the diamond market, arguably the gold market, arguably, I mean, all markets today are subject to the manipulation of the money power, as Roosevelt himself called this magic money tree idea. So anyway, that's that. Next we come to climate change, environmental, and hashtag wrong kind of deal of green. So Cory Morningstar did a whole series about manufacturing consent for wrapped up in greenwashing, as it were, and this was a Greta Thunberg event, which I analysed, and go into something. But there are like Club of Rome, Limits to Growth, Eugenics, Technocracy, Carbon, Currency, Energy, Economics, Circular Economy, Political Economy, Science. Right now, so what I do is I go through and analyse all of this, and further down the blog here, there's a series of economics textbooks which are produced by someone holding this worldview, and I've read these textbooks, and we'll get to them in a minute. So here we are. So principles of economics in context, macroeconomics in context, and microeconomics in context. And this name here, Goodwin, is actually Neva Goodwin Rockefeller, who's one of the children, the daughter of David Rockefeller. And in the early edition of the macroeconomics book, there's an excellent discourse on money and how money works, which I think in the second edition it doesn't appear. Now that's quite interesting, in that the censored editions of Tragedy and Hope are less flagging of the Bank of International Settlements, for instance. For God's sake. Oi, oi, oi. Oh, disaster here. Dog opening the door. There we go. Right. So, anyway, that's that. That point there for now. How this weaves into the narrative which comes out of James Corbett's 2 movies, these points that I've got here, I'm not elaborating on the points as I go along. They are elaborated on within the blogs, and I haven't got time to write either a short letter or a long book about this stuff. This research is for my own purposes in trying to figure out how the hell to run my business against the backdrop of massive increased centralization, huge dilution of claims on wealth that, you know, shareholders, investors, and business associates of mine wish to direct at value adding, wealth creating business enterprises. And clearly, it's important to have an idea of what the body parasitic on the wealth creating body is actually up to, because obviously entrepreneurs of my stripe don't get bailouts. So anyway, that's that point. So, and then so this is the Wikipedia article on Neva Goodwin, you know, who's a scholar, etc. Clearly, obviously, with her own worldview, which is honouring her father, shall we say. So, Carol Quigley interview. This is an interview about Carol Quigley and or with him about the publication of his book and all the rest of it. I've listened to that before. I listened to a bit of it yesterday, but I did promise to refer you to what I find a much more enlightening discourse on areas which Joseph Plummer claims Carol Quigley must be mistaken, and it's this one here, Roundtable Review. Just open up a new tab. Hopefully the server's still up. It's got that on there. So here we are. So this is a roundtable review of the book The Naked Capitalist, which is the Skousen book, and the participants are W. Cleon Skousen, who wrote The Naked Capitalist, Carol Quigley, Lewis Midgley, and William Thorpe Jr. So this is the introduction to it. It's really worth reading. So dialogue departs from its usual review format in the following exchange of points of view on W. Cleon Skousen's latest book, The Naked Capitalist. Dr. Carol Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope. Originally, we asked Professor Lewis Midgley of Brigham Young University to review Skousen's book for dialogue. Shortly after receiving Midgley's review, we received an unsolicited review from William E. Thorpe Jr., also of Brigham Young University, which took an approach opposite that of Midgley. Since much of the controversy surrounding Skousen's book centred on the interpretation of Quigley's book, we thought it might be interesting to get a response from Quigley to Skousen's book and Midgley's review. In a further attempt at a dialogue, we invited Skousen to reply to Midgley and Quigley, and finally invited Midgley to write a rejoinder to Skousen. All in all, it is a lively exchange and one we hope our readers enjoy. And it is a lively exchange, and it's very well worth reading because different worldviews, different constructions upon the same historical facts are addressed in this. It's only 18 pages long, and so, you know, it's well worth reading. So here, Midgley, The Cult of Conspiracy. Don't forget, this is 1970. Just want to get to Carol Quigley's bit, and let's read Carol Quigley's bit. You can read the rest. So Quigley's response: thank you for the opportunity to read The Naked Capitalist and Midgley's review of it. I think his review is very perceptive, and there is very little I can add to it. Midgley is correct in his basic statement that Skousen has simply taken extended passages from my book in violation of copyright and put them together in terms of his own assumptions and preconceptions to make a picture very different from my own. Skousen is apparently a political agitator. I am an historian. My book merely tried to give an account of what happened in the world in the early part of the 20th century. I did a good deal of independent research on it, much of it in places which did not attract Skousen's attention at all, such as French economic history and economic history in general. The book was published 5 years ago, on the whole, except perhaps for my section on Red China. It has stood the challenge of later information fairly well. The chapter on Germany, from Kaiser to Hitler, has just been republished by Houghton Mifflin in a book entitled Why Hitler? So, okay, we all need now to go and get a copy of Carol Quigley's book, Why Hitler, and read that, because that is the point which is still causing quite a lot of excitement on Richard Grove's Tragedy and Hope site. So, Midgley has pointed out that the chief distortions of my materials in Skousen's book, My Picture of Financial Capitalism, said that it was prevalent in the period 1880 to 1933. Skousen quotes these dates into several places, yet he insists that these organizations are still running everything. I said clearly that they were very powerful, but also said that they could not control the situation completely and were unable to prevent things they disliked, such as income and inheritance taxes. Moreover, I thought I had made it clear that the control of bankers was replaced by that of self-financed or government-financed corporations, many of them in the West and the Southwest, in oil or in aerospace, and I saw a different alignment of American politics since 1950. Skousen implies that financial capitalism was not only omnipotent but immoral, both of which I denied. Okay, so you can read that your way, but you can see how actually where we are now, things have turned around again. Now, I think Skousen's son is still current, and is an interesting guy, well worth listening to. But clearly, it's approached from a specific worldview. I think, Brigham Run, etc., is the Mormon University, and so what is that worldview? I mean, you start getting into a spiritual belief system as well as an economic belief system, beliefs regarding how best to structure political economy, etc. And so that opens up another series of interesting questions. And as I say, I don't believe any party has settled any questions in particular. I think better questions could be put forward if we all put our heads together. And I do wish people from different culturally and spiritually and religiously formed cultural backgrounds would put their heads together more often to actually find the points of common ground as opposed to on those which they differ, because the points of differences, that's why that's why birds of a feather flock together. Within one's own castle, as it were, one should be free to live by one's own rules. And the current huge overreach of state corporate actors in an era of surveillance capitalism, neither of which are kind of aren't within the imaginings of Quigley's book. It's a history book. But as James properly points out, the snooping element and the control freakery element of the technocracy movement is very much within the scope of present technological capabilities. So anyway, that's that point. That's the Carol Quigley interview. Right, now this is LibGen, and LibGen is a website on which many books can be found, so books that are out of print. It's a fantastic library. I mean, I live here in Sweden, and so I use it because I can't always get to a library or ask a library to order me an actual. But I love thumbing through books. I love doing that. But with the amount of material you can access through the I tend to make the writing big and read it on. I've got a very large screen, so I can make it big enough that I can read it without my glasses occasionally. But anyway, actually, the original. Well, there are several versions on here, and also. So, which version of Tragedy and Hope are the uncensored versions? So let's just say here. So the roundtable discussion between Scouse and Quigley and Midgley. But here we are. Right, we discovered that Carol Quigley .net offered an electronic version of Tragedy and Hope, which omits censors pages 62 to 63. Those pages are in the 1966 edition and the 2004 reprint. The relevance of the omitted censored pages of Tragedy and Hope are this: the Bank of England, a Rothschild-controlled entity under Montagu Norman, contracted with Helmer Schacht, known as Hitler's banker, to create an international clearinghouse called the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland. By manipulating the price of gold and the other markets, the acolytes of Cecil Rhodes, seeking to conquer the world through an Anglo-American establishment, could leverage the evolution of civilizations and use human nature to control human beings, or as Norbert Wiener would later say, human use of human beings, cybernetics. Now, right, that is a large point of difference philosophically, which I clearly have with Richard Groves here, and presumably with James Corbett, and acolytes of Cecil Rhodes. Now, John Ruskin's Unto This Last, for instance, I think is also a brilliant exposition of the excesses of what Roosevelt called the money power. It's a worldview which seems to take issue with Charles Sanders Peirce, who happens to be one of my favourite philosophers, and his great paper on how to make our ideas clear is wonderful, and the separation of people's class or cultural allegiances from their analysis of and presentation of empirical ideas it's always helpful to separate those two things. And of course, the schools of thought around materialism or idealism. Now, materialism doesn't mean consumerism. Materialism, in a philosophical sense, is a belief in the real, the solid, the five, the senses of sight, taste, smell, touch, etc. Now, idealism is the idea that actually the only thing that really counts is how we feel in our minds about those things. So it's the mind-body dichotomy. There's a whole bunch of stuff about all of this, and so that and there are two themes that run through philosophy, as David Graeber says, from Heraclitus to Parmenides, and it is the big bust up fundamental disagreement as between free will and determinism. I actually don't know much of Mormon philosophy, I must admit. Or the church, it's the Church of Latter-day Saints, isn't it? I think. Like I say, I don't know. Church of Scientology too. I really don't know. I know rather a lot about Judaism and Orthodox Christianity. A smaller amount about Islam, or what we call the Abrahamic faith. So I know about those, and I have some smatterings of Confucian and Indian philosophies, but some of the more niche sects within the Christian faith, there are a lot of them, and so but I do wonder whether it's a particular Calvinistic inspired unconditional election thing going on. I don't know. It's a hard one. But as I say, I mean, we can argue about those things all day long. Empirically speaking, my only thing with this is to read now. I'm going to get hold of a copy of Why Hitler by Carol Quigley, a very good book on actually the First World War. It is the Frank Harris book of it was actually why Frank Harris preferred the German nobility to the British aristocracy. Fascinating reading. So written by a guy that was born in Wales, brought up in Ireland, and who was the literary executor of Oscar Wilde. Fantastic character, Frank Harris. So anyway, here we go. So here we are, Charles Sanders Peirce, the father of American pragmatism. So where are we? Educated as a chemist and employed as a scientist for 30 years. Peirce made major contributions to logic. Yes, he did. A subject for him encompassed much of what is now called epistemology and the philosophy of science. He saw logic as the formal branch of semiotics. Semiotics is the philosophy of signs and semantics of words, of which he has found, which foreshadowed the debate among logical positives and proponents of philosophy of language that dominated 20th century Western philosophy. Additionally, he defined the concept of abductive reasoning as well as rigorously formulated mathematical injunction and deductive reasoning. As early as 1886, he saw that logical operations could be carried out by electrical switching circuits. The same idea was used decades later to produce digital computers. So anyway, that's Charles Sanders Peirce, who's one of my go-tos. Another person that came into some criticism was Thorstein Veblen. And again, I don't find anything to argue about with Veblen in his diagnosis of the Gilded Age. I really don't. So then we come to Henry James Sr. He became deeply absorbed in Swedenborgianism. Now, Emanuel Swedenborg I live in Sweden, he was a Swede. So I've sort of done various digging into Emanuel Swedenborg. It's kind of fascinating stuff, not my cup of tea. Then here we go. So this is my YouTube channel. And where are we? Let's have a look. Right, this is Richard Grove's YouTube channel. So,
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most
Grand Theft World podcast. Okay, so let's see Richard's videos here. Grand Theft World. That's an interesting photo there. I didn't know that photo. I mentioned the one with James Corbett where they talk about Tim Pool, and so that's all on here. And then if we sort them by oldest first, okay, so Tragedy and Hope. So there we are. And there's John Taylor Gatto, who again is a go-to for me. His views on education I find quite compelling. Also his work on Prussian kind of totalitarianism as well is very interesting. Well, that'll be interesting. Abby Martin interviews whistleblower Richard Grove. So what's that? What did Richard blow the whistle on then? Let's see.
Hey guys, welcome to Breaking the Set. I'm Abby Martin. So while the Supreme Court was in its second day of oral arguments surrounding gay marriage today, the justices always also sent down unanimous ruling in favor of rights for another group of individuals, prisoners. That's right. In the case of Millbrook versus the U.S., the justices ruled that the federal government can be sued over prisoner abuse claims against their guards. It's about time prisoners had some rights, considering the U.S. houses 1.6 million adults in state and federal media database of the highest academic quality information, ranging from everything to philosophy to economics. So to talk about his personal story and journey to becoming a media revolutionary, I'm joined now by Richard Grove, corporate whistleblower and producer of The Ultimate History Lesson. Thanks so much, Richard. It's an honor to have you on.
Thank you, Abby. It's a pleasure to be on. I'm a big fan of the show.
So you were working for the software development company in 2000, responsible for getting in their biggest client. You then found out that the company you were working for was stealing money. Elaborate on what exactly is it that you uncovered, Richard, with this software?
Well, I mean, what you're talking about is it's ranging over 10 years of experience. So there's a specific instance where you mentioned at the end that kind of came around in 2003. The 9/11 whistleblowing came around in 2000 and 2001 after the events of 9/11, and I noticed that there was insider trading on not only to the airlines, but to the clients that we were specifically providing with a cutting-edge brand of software that allowed them in later years to take advantage of many clients around the world. So, it was a slow, incremental me waking up to the naivete of what I had been groomed to believe through public school and college, to the way that the corporate world really worked, and that led to my retirement in 2003, and here we are 10 years later. So how would you like to dip into that?
Well, let's talk about the back door that you initially found and then subsequently went to your superiors and talked about what you had uncovered and what happened to you. So just go over those things.
All right, so now we're talking about an instance in 2003. I was at a different company by then, and I specifically was aware of the financial fraud that was going on in the market. In 2002, Congress passed a law called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was a regulation set for all corporations to implement so that they couldn't have any more Tycos or Enrons or WorldComs. And so I went to a software company specifically because they sold this regulation software, and my clients were the world's largest financial services company. And so in the midst of bringing them this technology, which I thought was going to help clean up the market, I discovered through various clients that they wanted it to hide information and that there were actually backdoors in the software that facilitated that. And that's where I became a whistleblower.
And you took this information, Richard, this is the most mind-blowing part, to the government, the Securities and Exchange Commission specifically. And what did they do when you told them?
Well, actually, since 2001, the SEC had been investigating my current employer at that time. So when I contacted them, I expected them to say, great, we kind of know about different angles, and this will shed a different angle of light. And what they said was, the information I was looking to share could land me in prison. And from there, I thought, well, under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, it provides protection for whistleblowers. So I then tried to go through court for several years. And when that failed, when that proved to be a fallacious belief of mine, that there were checks and balances like that, after proving my case in court, after proving everything I stated as a case, they dismissed it on a technicality by moving the triggering date of the event after several years of litigation to an earlier date so that the court would be out of its jurisdiction.
And didn't you say that they actually adopted some of this software that had these glaring errors that could facilitate money?
Okay, well, that's fascinating. I should look into that a bit more. Page not found. There we are. That's the link to the story. So, which case is that then? Elliot Spitzer versus AIG and Marsh and McLennan in 2004. Elliot Spitzer was a reforming district attorney, I think, or attorney general of New York, who was given the compromat treatment, I think we could probably say. So that's an interesting bit of interesting background there. Right, so here we go. So Worldviews, this is an excellent series on a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, by a famous Brazilian philosopher, Marxist philosopher, possibly, called Paulo Freire, and this is an American professor, Jason Campbell, who does an excellent series of it. It's an easy enough read. I mean, grab a copy and have a read, and it's worth going through Jason's course because he brings to it a wider context of his other philosophical knowledge. So here we go. Right, so neoclassical political economy skating on thin ice. So this is where we get to the point now, and this is the point about the price system, what's loosely called capitalism, financial capitalism, in Skousen's take on it in the roundtable discussion. It's a continuing problem, but this is a lecture on neoclassical political economy written by two professors that say capital isn't money at all. Capital is power. And so most of us probably familiar with the term political power, or political capital, but capital as power is a kind of a ramped up, supercharged version of political capital, if you see what I mean. And this gives an analysis. This guy here is called Pierre Safra, who was involved in a thing known as the Cambridge controversy, which was between some MIT economists in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and some Cambridge, England economists, Pierre Safra, Ramsey, John Maynard Keynes, that lot. And let's just get the bit here. Here we are. Look, here's John D. Rockefeller. So here we go. John D. Rockefeller gave $45 million to the University of Chicago. According to his own testimony, it was the best investment I ever made. And obviously, that's the seat of the neoclassical school. And right, let's just. Okay. The denouement, so to speak. Here we are. Look. So, some Cambridge controversies in the theory of capital, which is about them. This is a book by Harcourt. This is Safra's book, Production of Commodities by Means of Commodities. It's only 84 or 99 pages long, that says. Oops. Let's just get this. Find. Because, the great eternal because. There we are, this is the one. 2543. Right, let's just have a bit of this. So,
compete on differentiated products, and oligopoly, where the market is dominated by a handful of giants. Most instructors devote very little time, and often no time at all, to these in-between structures, and they particularly love to neglect oligopoly. And that's noteworthy because in modern-day capitalism, oligopoly is not the exception, it's the rule. For consumer goods, for example, has numerous brands, but most of these brands are owned by a few giants, in this case by Kraft, Mondelez, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, Unilever, Mars, Kellogg's, General Mills, PepsiCo, and Coca-Cola. In other words, it's an oligopoly. And this structure is prevalent in most markets you can think of. Is oligopoly a problem for neoclassical theory in general and for the independence of demand and supply in particular? Well, one reason is that oligopolistic firms are mutually interdependent, and their interdependency causes demand to change with supply. To start with, oligopolistic firms cooperate, and cooperation tends to kill the neoclassical model pretty much immediately. But even if they do not cooperate and instead compete, their interaction still is very problematic. Let's take an example from the breakfast cereal market. Think about Kellogg's, and let's assume that when Kellogg's this theory of distribution by productivity dominates economics till this very day, so it's worth looking into it a bit further. The basic tool of this theory is the so-called production function, where output Q is a mathematical function.
This is a bit technical, and then the rebuttal
labor,
of this
and
odd thing.
Each factor has its own intrinsic productivity. And finally, under conditions of perfect competition, the income of each factor is equal to the factor's marginal productivity. It was a major achievement. It proved that the capitalist system, no matter how unequal, was not only efficient but also just. Moreover, both efficiency and justice were automatic, so there was no need for any outcome.
Right, I'm not gonna go into that, but he gives 3 reasons why this is just plain wrong, and one of the reasons is because Safra and Safra's work on the circularity of price, profit, rate of return, and its circular reasoning. It doesn't, prove anything. It's you can prove anything you like with it, as long as you believe in it. It's a religious school of thought. It's not an empirical scientific thing. Now, and this is at the core of what the technocrats or technocracy have an insight into, and that is that measuring things with money is just not sensible because of this. But you can define money in terms of a fixed standard. Now, and energy is a very good fixed standard to use as that standard international unit, as it were. Now, in a way, gold, or the price of gold, kind of did that, but kind of didn't, because it was, however it's manipulated and all the rest of it, the importance of being able to enable prosperity for all, using money as a means of exchange is a really good way of doing that. So going back to the point of Joseph Plummer about having multiple currencies, I think Bernard Laitier speaks to that in his paper on Terra, TERRA, which is a Terra based, it's a company based on a basket of commodities, which gives a reference for international trade. At a domestic level, in Chile, they have something called the Unidad de Fomento, and what that is it's very similar to the precursor to the euro in Europe, which was the EQ, the European Currency Unit. And those sorts of systems are systems under which the issue of the monetary unit to ensure productive and wealth creating use rather than just blowing up asset bubbles. And so at its heart, this is also the key to understanding Professor Richard Werner's theory of disaggregated credit. So there are several strands coming together. And then finally, when we get to the oil question and the carbon base standard or carbon rationing, and what that is in terms of defining a unit of debt as opposed to being a defined currency unit that can't be tampered with, and which therefore means that you can't have your work basically diluted. The huge amount of increased claims on wealth represented by the expansion of balance sheets of central banks all over the world effectively dilutes everybody else's claims on wealth. And so people with first use on newly created credit actually have an advantage when it is expanded to such a great extent that it actually represents a massive dilution of people that have had earnings but not had chance to spend them yet. Now, most people tend to look at that from the point of view of, well, when inflation has gone up, and inflation is robbing you of that. But that inflation comes from somewhere. There is a manipulation of prices in the way that the oil price can be manipulated, and manipulated with respect to the swing production, which is kind of like a governance of price ranges, if you will. So these things are all linked, and so dismissing all of the technocracy reasoning, their prescription, let's reject all of it if you like, but a key insight is this insight into measuring things with a variable unit. So that's that. So, and then the sorts of things that result from all of this. Caitlin Johnson, I read occasionally. I enjoy reading Caitlin's work, but she wrote this article on renting sucks, where she rents an apartment and she's got to move out because the land was going to redevelop, and you know she like anyway, read it. But this is it's the fault of the monetary system as opposed to the system of political economy and the different forms of capitalism. Financialized capitalism, surveillance capitalism, a kind of a mixed economy. It's so when I read Caitlin, you know, there's a go-to, it's all those nasty capitalists. Well, it's actually a bit more complicated than that. And the interesting thing about Caitlin is that she does actually seem to believe that and this is something I've commented on her blog before, saying, you know, if the media is this massive lie machine, how come it's the climate stuff isn't lies? What you know? How do you reconcile that? How do you get rid of that bit of cognitive? Like I said, I'm genuinely curious. But this, I think she lives in Melbourne, and the property market there, you know, the property bust coming in Australia, whether that could bring down the whole world economy or not is a thing. And I wonder whether the huge, massive overreaction to the response to the 2019 flu season, 2019-2020 flu, whether their response is actually more to do with how sick their financial sector is and how vulnerable it is to a massive property crash. Just put that out there. Obviously, they're a massive net exporter of commodities as well, and it's not only oil which is traded in dollars on international markets, and it's you know, obviously the other thing is they're a massive producer of coal. And stopping people from using coal instead of some other monopolized thing, you know, there's a backstory in that as well as you know, land grabs, asset grabs in the Northern Territory, etc. There's a part to this which really does need to be looked at, because the motivation is control. When that degree of control is reached, whether some of the more extreme nutjob psychopaths, like the guy that's quoted in James's documentary, saying, you know, what we do with the cannon fodder, those sorts of views, I mean, they're abhorrent to me. I mean, I just think that but the return to a sort of neo-feudalism, I buy into that. I do think that's where this is all headed. A techno-neo-feudalism of the Brave New World type, etc., via a period of 1984, or indeed it will be 1984 for most people, Brave New World for the, you know, the technocrats, I guess, and then it will be, you know, inner party privileges back to 1984 and Brave New World for the, you know, for the higher up, you know, for they who must be obeyed, as it were. So anyway, that just a point there in passing as we go along. And then we'll come to this one. Now, this is here because Nous is the York University newspaper. nous is a Greek word for wisdom. But this is an interesting student newspaper talking about the Great Barrington Declaration and Nigel Farage, Richard Times launching and it's interesting in how completely unradical it is for a newspaper, which is part of the problem. So this is Gatto's point, and the point that Richard Groves just made there about public education. It's sprawl steps ain't going to be happening in York University anytime, is there? They ain't going to be throwing themselves across the levers and saying, well, that's more than it's gone too far, and just can't sort of get involved anymore. Right, I'm just going to play this as a break now. This is Kashin in my head.
I wonder why you act so bad and you try so hard to try. I see the sky is open wide. Take a look inside. It's wild like a galaxy. Come on, it's all in my head. It's all in my head. I'm sorry, you and me. Wherever you go, I will be. Just close your eyes and you'll see. And wherever you go, I will be. On the other side of that reply, got our flags singing, falling the sun. I'm flying high, spinning in that tide, living life, loving free. This is where I wanna be. Come on, it's all in my head. It's all in my head. I'm sorry, you and me. Wherever you go, I will be. Just close your eyes and you'll see. And wherever you go, I will be. slightly hungover. Slightly hungover you.
I hope you're not slightly hungover. I'm not. So anyway, that was Kashin before there in my head. And moving on. Now, this is a poem that I wrote called Bourgeois Resolution. A poem in 3 voices for added 4th part harmony. And I write in the introduction to it, this poem is about the pedagogy of the oppressed. It represents all that I've come to understand about representative democracy and the disjoint between power relations, and political power. Politicians claiming democratic objectives in the interests of the constituents of the communities they represent, but actually patronize. This is the tension between elites from grand bourgeois to petit bourgeois, and their aversion to all forms of popular expressions of solidarity by the working class. Anything outside the boundaries set by the bourgeoisie sensibilities and aesthetic mores of the political and chattering classes is deemed vulgar and vicious in the viceful sense. As with the resolution will be live. We interrupt your discord to bring you this resolution from popular consciousness. And then there's a trailer to, or a part of the film by Louis Brunel, The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, as a kind of an introduction to that. Then there's the Society of Spectacle, which is the Guy Debord film, and then the poem Bourgeois Resolution. Now, let's just have a look here. Now, it's based on the Hegelian dialectic of synthesis or antithesis, synthesis, antithesis, and synthesis, which gets a lot of people quite excited. But let's just get a stanza which I'll just read these 2 stanzas. Écoutez et répétez, listen and repeat, learn by rote and do not question. To each that has should be given, those who hath not will be punished. No one's better than issue scripted speech when spoken to, obsequious. Do not blanch before appearance of grandeur. Pompous ceremony seeks to silence chafing curiosity. How readily the pecking order has regiments in line, volunteers to a false consciousness of liberation by society's consumptive ills, Polysemus. So that is part of a trilogy of poems. The first one is Usury Hell's Fuel, Man's Oppressor. Second one is Bourgeois Resolution. And the last one in that trilogy is Globalization Unentangled. And there are notes on the blogs and a lot of source material. And in Usury Hell's Fuel, a lot of it is drawn from Tragedy and Hope. So next then, this is a BBC programme, Melvyn Bragg's programme in our time. And this is one on the Pelagian controversy, which is the beef between Pelagius, an Irish monk, and St. Augustine. And that's really worth interesting, I think. And these two, similar to Heraclitus and Parmenides, had a different take on the idea of free will. Pelagius, who I come down with on this one, says that free will is really the ability to, confronted with 2 choices, to take the right choice rather than the wrong choice. A determined authority, the Augustinian view, is that actually the choice you take is still to do with preordainment, as it were. And it's so again, it's back to David Graeber's point, which he makes in a story actually about the election which John Kerry lost to George Bush. Why did that happen? Which is again it's an excellent essay of David Graeber's. This is the Derek Jarman film written by Tariq Ali on Ludwig Wittgenstein, which again is a different way of looking at the world, reappraising things. And then we come to this one. Now, this is Jesus and the Economic Life. And I'm going to read this because it's very pertinent to where we are now. So, right, the coming of the Roman Empire destroyed the community-based economy that God had provided for the children of Israel. The Sadducees and the priestly families that collaborated with the Romans were rewarded with large land holdings. Many accumulated large blocks of land. The people who had previously owned them were turned into tenant farmers who had to hand over at least half of their crops to their landlords. 2. The empire imposed exorbitant taxes on the ordinary people. This pushed most families into poverty. If taxes could not be paid, their property would be confiscated. The tax collectors got rich, and the rest became tenant farmers or day labourers. Jesus saw the tax collectors as sick. For ordinary people, storing up wealth was impossible. If the Roman soldiers found coins or grain hidden in a house, they would smash the house. 4. Debt was used to impoverish people and to steal their land. A person who was poor would be lent money at very high interest rates, 50%, using their land as security. When they were unable to pay the interest or repay the loan, the interest would be added to the loan. In a few years, a small loan could grow to be worth more than the land given as security. The lender would demand the land to settle the debt. 5. Herod built a Greek-style temple in Jerusalem. His son Antipas built the new Roman cities of Deiopolis and Tiberias. The governor of Judea built a new city of Caesar Philip in honor of Caesar. To pay for these building projects, the people had to pay tribute. People were hungry all the time. During those days, another large crowd gathered since they had nothing to eat. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way. The state of people's health was so bad that going without food was debilitating. 7. By Jesus' time, most families in Israel had no land. Most of the land was controlled by a few powerful families and moneylenders. Tax collectors and soldiers would grab most of the crops that were grown and most money that was earned. The people were left with very little to live on. Most people were hungry most of the time. Many would have to find some work each day as a day labourer to buy their food for the day. That is why Jesus knew the people who had followed him around the lake to listen to his teaching all day would be hungry. If they had not worked, they would have no food and not be able to buy any. For the people of Israel, the Roman Empire was a terrible place to live. Land was concentrated in the hands of a few. Capital was no longer distributed evenly. The people did not have money to lend to others because all surpluses were taken by the Romans and the temple system. Life was brutal and extreme poverty was normal. No wonder people were looking for a Messiah who would break the shackles of Rome and free them from the burden of debt, tax, and tribute. Could have been written yesterday. Another person that deals with the Gospels of Jesus is Tolstoy in his Gospels. I was rereading his own summary, the recapitulation, summarising his exegesis, if you like, of the original Greek translation of the presumably Hebrew Aramaic text. So anyway, that's a great website called King Watch, Christian Political Economy. Next, here we are. This is Leo Tolstoy, The Gospel in Brief. I'll put the link in, and you can download it from. Bear in mind that Leo Tolstoy was excommunicated from the Orthodox Russian Church for writing this. Then next, got this blog here, the inescapable trilemma of the world economy. The end of democracy, not the end of history. So this is a diagram of the impossible trinity: free capital flow, fixed exchange rate, sovereign monetary policy. The impossible trinity, or the trilemma, in which two policy positions are possible. If a nation were to adopt position A, for example, then it would maintain a fixed exchange rate and allow free capital flows, the consequence of which would be loss of monetary sovereignty. So there we are. So how do you solve that? This blog goes into quite a lot of more modern monetary history, including George Soros breaking the Bank of England, Mr. Churchill's memorandum, and the whole bit. So you'll get some idea of. So here you see, look, the unholy trinity, the influence of John Locke, Adam Smith, and John Maynard Keynes on Britain's three great transformations. So, of course, Carroll Quigley is not the only historian, economic or otherwise, that tackles these great historiographic windings, I guess. So there's lots of stuff in there. And then this episode 7, the Mandarin Revolution, this is the age of uncertainty. Austrians, Chicago schools, whatever, they may or may not be aware of Milton Friedman's television series that was produced as a direct response to John Kenneth Galbraith's The Age of Uncertainty. Then we go on here to this is a website about technocracy, which when I read, I thought, well, wow, that's amazing. So, and what I say is what follows is akin to when the main character, Winston, in 1984, starts reading a copy of The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. Make Orwell fiction again. And this is this website here, which is written. She's a computer systems engineer, or was, and this website and her previous website tracks a lot of the detail in the narrative that's set out in why big oil conquered the world, and that should have opened here, and so you can see. Control energy, control the world. Okay, that is really my thesis here. So anyway, there's a huge amount of material there to consider. Why it won't go to there. So then. Right, enough blah, 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 challenging the Davos great new narrative, finding the energy to reset the agenda. Well, that speaks for itself. And this is a quote from Paulo Freire. Critical reflection on practice is a requirement of the relationship between theory and practice. Otherwise, theory becomes simply blah, 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 and practice pure activism. And that is actually a quote from Pedagogy of the Oppressed. This is James Corbett's looking at an interview with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his book on Fauci. And then this was an interesting discussion. Andrew Kaufman is interested in the theory of exosomes, as well as theories of germs, theories of viruses, etc. But during this presentation, there was a question that came in from someone who was watching that turned out to be a professor of mycology with with technical knowledge about how the SARS-CoV-2 spike had been analysed or whatever. My own view is that debate is a distraction from the main play here, which is digital points, basically carbon-based, carbon footprint-based carbon rationing system to bring in a techno-feudalism along the lines of the technocracy's prescription of energy certificates. And as I say, their idea of a monetary unit defined in a standard energy unit, that's a good one. Actually rationing and personalizing and total control, a deterministic view, is just unacceptable, unnecessary, and as I say, it's physician heal oneself there, I'm afraid. So anyway, that goes into all of this. And then this excellent paper by Dennis Rancourt, PhD, which predatory globalization and social engineering, fantastic paper, which he's interviewed about in this June 13th, 2019 interview with Colin Todd Hunter, from dollar hegemony to global warming, globalization, glyphosate, and doctrines of consent. So that's that. Right. Never touch the money system. Neoclassical heterodox economics, two cheeks of the same arse. So this is looking at the Nixon neoclassical political economy skating on thin ice presentation. Here's a link to the Bilderberg. This is me and Rod Ranjan discussing carbon indulgences and stuff like that. There's the clip which I played at the beginning of the international control the debt. And then in the Bilderberg film, similarly in James's big oil film, The Oil Shock of 1973, these are the functionaries meeting in Sweden in 1973. This is a little discussion I had with an engineer who was getting into political economy about the just the utter stupidity of the production function in neoclassical economics, and so it's just an argument that is further demonstrated and much better demonstrated by the Nixon presentation. So these are some other interesting things along the line. Lords of Scam, that's a brilliant Netflix film in French about an early scam in France on carbon trading. So on. This is Brave New World of Carbon Trading, the Clive Spash paper. That's my review of the Economic Superorganism book by Kari King. So forth. Then that's my response to Frank Slater. Right, Iron Law of Oligarchy. If you search that, I think this is what comes up. This is an interesting integral analysis approach to what's known as equal, all quarters, all levels, which is, again, a thing about analysing and diagnosing and then prescribing, and how an analysis can often be influenced by the preferred prescription, as it were. And this is a way to make sure that you consider all angles, as it were. And there's a wonderful paper by Bernard Laitier called An Integral Approach to Money, So this is Safra's response to Hayek's criticism of, I think it was Keynes's general theory, part of the Cambridge controversies. This is a book about that. Or is it? Hold on, where are we? So Safra Hayek debate. That's it. That's that. I'll put the links in there. Counterfactuals. So this is David Lewis, his work on possible other worlds, etc. Here we are. So counterfactuals, theories of causation. It kind of goes to the heart of this. Why could Skousen and Quigley have such massively different views on the same question? So the basic idea of counterfactual theories of causation is that the meaning of causal claims can be explained in terms of counterfactual conditionals of the form: if A had not occurred, C would not have occurred. Most counterfactual analyses are focused on claims of the form event C caused event E, describing singular or token or actual causation. Such analyses have become popular since the development in the 1970s of possible world semantics for counterfactuals. The best known counterfactual analysis of causation is David Lewis's theory. However, intense discussion over 40 years has cast doubt on the adequacy of any simple analysis of singular causation in terms of counterfactuals. Recent years have seen a proliferation of different refinements of the basic idea. The structural equations or causal modeling framework is currently the most popular way of cashing out the relationship between causation and counterfactuals. That might all sound like a bit of a word soup and all the rest of it, but it's really, really important, especially if you have an algorithmic understanding and digital understanding of the world, which perhaps could do with tempering. Here's the slog. Planet of the Ants. This. So let's just. Here we are. Right. I try to keep things here as real as possible. I recognise that there are trolls who would disagree, but there's nothing I can do about that. Never write their opinion, even if they think I don't. Here are some things I've been boffing on about for the best part of 16 years. Education has become politicised and in the process bred a generation of sufficiency rather than excellence, of acceptance without distrust. The arrival of the internet allowed corporate fat cats to hide behind website bilge and pretend this was after-sales service. 3, they fired millions of people, chose brainless bots to replace them, sang the praises of AI and made whole new levels of obscene profit. 4, most citizens complied and did not complain. 5, since 2008-9, it has been impossible to gain interest on one's savings. That doesn't represent capitalism, but rather perverted and exploitative monopolism. 6, business has gone evolutionary backwards into devious service provision at the expense of creative manufacturing. 7, the providers of these services have more and more become the bankrollers of political parties who long ago lost the confidence of all but the most extreme of their supporters. 8, most citizens complied and did not complain. 9, Silicon Valley high-tech branched out from nerdy internet hardware to ISP software and created social media to spy on citizens for the state rather than offering investigative journalism to keep the state under control. 10, the 21st century version of Mussolini's corporate fascist state was born. 11, most citizens complied and did not complain. 12, elected representatives of largely mediocre cloned ability were no match for bureaucrats corrupted by increasing levels of incestuous congress with senior globalists. 13, as those bureaucrats spawned the secret state after the Second World War, it was inevitable that globalism and the high-tech surveillance of the system would collide happily with the banking institutions, those who knew the how, where, and when of their depositors' money use. 14, EFT, POS, smart cards, and calls for digitalisation of money followed. 15, most citizens complied and did not complain. John has 2 terms which he mentions. Texas Big Oil is one of the ones that he mentions quite a lot, and the other one is Zilllaners. And they are two of the key players in the story of how Big World conquered the oil. The why of Big Oil conquered the world, I think, is tied up in the analysis of capitalist power that I mentioned earlier. So this is a blog which goes into Spash's paper. And I like this quote from the Crucible. A fire is burning. I hear the boot of Lucifer. I see his filthy face, and it is my face, and yours stand forth. For them that quail to bring men out of ignorance, as I have quailed, and as you quail now, damns our kind especially, and we will burn together. So here we are, the economic superorganism, review and criticism, close but no cigar. So this is Green No Deal apologetic, or Green New Deal rather, and my analysis and my contention that plateau oil and swing production of commodities is through the petrodollar, replacing that with a carbon petrodollar or carbon hydrocarbon, a hydrocarbon dollar, as it were. So that's that. Here's an interview with the author, Kerry King. And then I didn't have time really to do anything with quite a short review, but I did do a PDF which is online, which has got a whole slug of Carol Quigley in the middle of it. So if I just find the link to that and open that up. Where are we? Here we are. This is it here. So we'll just open that and scroll down to the Carol Quigley stuff, which is the Carol Quigley stuff in my poem, Usury Hell's Fuel, Man's Oppressor. Here we go. Right, so let me just get down to the Carol Quigley bits. So this is I'm not going to go into that. This is the key misunderstanding. The whole base of this analysis should look at net energy surplus over cost of energy extraction. In a real sense, the sentence, we should be carefully looking at where we are investing our energy, qua energy, would have money taking the debt-based monetary unit as a reference renders the statement meaningless as per pro energy capital allocation decisions. That's kind of it's not pedantry, it's an important point. So let's just get down to right, okay. So this is the part of Tragedy and Hope, talking about two major goals of bankers, from page 49 of the uncensored edition, page 57. In it's page 57 onwards. It's too long to read now. But anyway, this bit here, right, thus clearly money and goods are not the same thing, but are, on the contrary, exactly opposite things. Most confusion in economic thinking arises from failure to recognize this fact. Goods are wealth, which you have, while money is a claim on wealth, which you do not have. Thus, goods are an asset, money is a debt. If goods are wealth, money is not wealth, or negative wealth, or even anti-wealth. They always behave in opposite ways, just as they usually move in opposite directions. If the value of one goes up, the value of the other goes down, and in the same proportion. And then this highlighted bit here, the operations of banking and finance were concealed, so they appeared difficult to master in some. Specialization of economic activities by breaking up the economic process and made it possible for people to concentrate on one portion of the process. Blah, blah, blah. Relationship with price system depended on 5 things: the supply and demand for the goods, the supply and demand for the money, the speed of exchange between money and goods. I mean, it's a very, very good analysis that Quigley gives. It's beautifully argued and structured, and takes some time to go through, more time than I can spare reading it and giving my own personal interpretation. So anyway, this is Bichler and Nitson Archives, Capital as Power, a study of order and pre-order. Now, what brought me to their work was they did an analysis of the huge concentration of wealth which happened at the beginning of the response to the 2019-2020 flu season. And their analysis, I think, is very solid. So this is the public intelligence website, where you can find lots of interesting documents, one of which is the 1973 Bilderberg meetings minutes, which James mentions in the Big Oil, How Big Oil Conquered the World, and also in the Bilderberg film by Daniel Estin. All right, I haven't got my VPN on, so it's not opening Pirate Bay. Bilderberg movies torrent. So here we are. This is the Wiki Spooks article on Daniel Estlin, who's ex-Russian military intelligence. He was obviously from Lithuania before the fall of the Berlin Wall, etc. What have we got here? Right, okay. Now,
French. Let me briefly explain.
This is Per Kurowski, and Per is an ex-director of the World Bank who's highly critical of banking regulations and misallocation of credit in the monetary system. And I think we should all listen to Per in the interest of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. For the same reason, we should listen to Richard Werner as well, because the solution that is given by Joseph Plummer is lots of competing currencies. Well, different currencies, yes, different mediums of exchange, store of wealth. That's a slightly different question, but lots of local banks making credit allocation decisions, even or preferably not-for-profit banks that are community held, is by far and away the best way to encourage small to medium enterprises and wealth creation. And Per is absolutely excellent on these points. So that's that. Right, then we come to John Ruskin. And now Scouse and the like are not keen on John Ruskin. They say he's an acolyte of Cecil Rhodes, I think, or he's part of a British intellectual milieu, if you like, that offends some US sensibilities. Unto This Last, which is a series of 4 essays, is essential reading, and I must say that Ruskin is as current now as he ever was. Now, this is Gandhi's translation. This is the Gandhi translation. So Gandhi famously translated Unto This Last into Urdu, and this is a translation back. And so this is Pushkin's point about translators being the false horses of the Enlightenment. I think it's Saint Jerome is the patron saint of translators, and it's an interesting exercise, not dissimilar from looking at the same information of people with different worldviews. Language, of course, is an encapsulation of worldviews. So go to Wittgenstein and back to Safra and Gramsci. That paper, this is understanding is an artifact of cultural influences as much as anything now. It has an effect. Right, so let me just find the quote. Right, so every capitalist of Europe has acquired his fortune by following the known laws of our science and increases his capital daily by an adherence to them. It is vain to bring forward tricks of logic against the force of accomplished facts. Every man of business knows by experience how money is made and how it is lost. Pardon me, men of business do indeed know how they themselves made their money or how on occasion they lost it. Playing a long practice game, they are familiar with the chances of its cards and can rightly explain their losses and gains. But they neither know who keeps the bank of the gambling house, nor what other games that may be played with the same cards, nor what other losses and gains, far away among the dark streets, are essentially, though invisibly, dependent on theirs in the lighted rooms. They have learned a few, and only a few, of the laws of mercantile economy, but not one of those of political economy. And that's what all this is about. Still, I think that was written, I'm sure it was in the 1860s. So then this is a blog which I did called McNamara, Tillerson, Woods, the World Bank Specialization, Revolving Door, all roads lead to and from the petrodollar, oil shock, or Cal Surprise. And so that goes down a bunch of stuff which is current to the time that Rex Tillerson, who's Exxon, Esso, so turned Standard Oil. And I mean, he basically stabbed Trump in the front, I think. And then this looks at a thing called the Brandt equation, which is a reflection on the Brandt Report, Committee of 20. These are all sort of high-level committees. So it's another thread through another narrative, and there are some oral histories showing how institutions like the World Bank effectively mould policy in at a national level, but overseen from an overarching level. And so there are kind of two examples. One's in Tanzania, others in, it mentions Sweden as well at some point. But the best whole one of that is Princes of the Yen, which is Richard Werner's book, and the film based on that book. So Ariadne's ball of string. Back to Gollum. To whom do we owe this money exactly? And this was a question asked by a blog called Sturdy Blog. It's not on there anymore, although it's reproduced here. And this is some exchanges which revolve around this question of money. So when, for instance, we're told by Richard Grove that, well, actually by Joseph Plummer, that, well, that's money, and that's all it is. We all know what that is, don't we? Well, do we? Then going direct, Blackstone, the repo spike, and purpose, the money pandemic. So this was a symposium at which Richard Werner does speak, Dennis Rancourt as well. And the report done in summer, autumn of 2019, which appears now to be being implemented by Blackstone. There's an excellent documentary online called Monopoly, which looks at Blackstone and at the concentration of huge power, wealth, and capital. So that's that. Right, tapping reserves will fail. So this is Miss Shedlock wrote about drawing down on oil stocks as a thing. So strategic oil reserves. So this starts to get to the point about swing oil production, etc. So this table here, and there's another diagram explaining how the system works. So this is a Finnish government paper which explains peak oil literate. What they mean by peak oil literate, I don't think they mean peak oil in a Hubbard way, Hubbard peak way. I understand it as literate in the petrodollar swing producer literacy, which I think is very, very interesting. So Mitch Churchill's exercise, British money. Oh, this is about the gold standard and sterling coming off gold. Don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. So this is me and Ranjan discussing the idea of swing production of oil. And then there's a poem I wrote called Tides of the Petrodollar Moon, which harks back to the demonetization of silver. So again, this is the multi-currency approach, or the having competing currencies, or having a store of wealth component and a means of exchange component, which is all up for discussion. So here we discuss the Great Monetary Reset, and then also looting. So looting of the NHS, for instance. This blog I did, 3 acres and a cow, milk in the USA, who ate all the pies. So 3 acres and a cow was a land reform slogan in Europe. 40 acres and a mule is a similar land reform slogan in the United States. And then there's the slogan of the Pentric Uprising in the UK, which was an end to the national debt and a larger loaf of bread. So there are themes going through there when people are like, hold on a minute, something ain't quite right. What's going on here? Stephen Zarlenga gets a mention in one of the interviews. I think it was the interview with Joseph Plummer, which, or it might have been Richard Groves, where they kind of find Stephen Zarlinger's take unpalatable for some reason. So this is Stephen Zarlinger's The Lost Science of Money, which owes a great debt to Delamar's Science of Money in the late 1800s. There's Tragedy and Hope. So you can see, in terms of source material, then, right, Timonism and the Calvinist strain in neoliberal misanthropy, Zionism, the money power, usury, the petrodollar, fall of the Roman Empire. So that's a blog I did back in 2017. And so these tells, if you like, in the hand of the oligarchy and the way they play their hand, they're blinking quite a lot at the moment. All we've really got to do is call and raise, in my opinion, and we'll have them. We'll get the pot. So I think that's a variation on the theme a little bit later. This is talking about Puritanism, Christian Zionism, Cromwell, formation of the Bank of England. The history in the UK of this stuff goes back a long way, and it throws up questions which are very awkward for the powers that be. So then, off Guardian extradition of Julian Assange. What is Julian Assange's crime exactly? Asking awkward questions and giving other people sufficient material to ask and find other awkward questions, perhaps. So anyway, in the Superorganism book, this one gets referenced, and it's Prosperity Without Growth by a guy called Tim Jackson, and it's got all the usual sort of breathless eulogies in the blurb, and they're all the usual suspects. So this is the two cheeks of the same arse point, both ends against the medal. Very Machiavellian, and are they gatekeepers, controlled opposition, useful idiots, all of the above, well-meaning, and it's a bit of all of these things, really. A Bob Dylan song, "You've Got to Serve Somebody," sort of comes to mind. Right, can banks individually create money? Yes, this is Richard's paper from 2015 with empirical evidence. 97% owned. This was the Positive Money film on how money's created. There's Ann Pettifor, who's one of the people that comes up. She's a big Green New Dealer. Right, so meet the Fuggers, Brexit, the Euro inclusive elites. I mentioned about challenging monetary hegemony. Abdel Melek's gold coinage of 695 AD sparked a war with the Byzantine Roman Emperor Justinian. He violated the ancient prerogative that only the supreme religious authority at the time, the Bacillus at Constantinople, could coin gold. And that's a slide which leads into Meet the Fuggers, where it's the money power stupid, Brexit, the Euro clueless elites. And that's kind of a peculiarly local European dispute, which has wider globalization characteristics. NATO is kind of writ large by not being written into this thing, although it does explain, in my later understanding, quite a lot about Richard A. North's position. So, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting, quite a long thing that I wrote in February 2017. Right, so now we're going to have an episode of the Jetsons. to go and have a cigarette.
These local slidewalks are so slow, I get there faster walking. You rent a maid. Hello? Anyone here? I'd like to rent a maid.
Yes. You have an appointment and your credentials?
Credentials?
Madam, you can't expect to get our maids without references. We must be sure they go to happy homes.
But my mother told me.
That's good enough. Any reference from any mother is all we need. Now, how big is your home?
We have 3 bedrooms.
Ooh, a slum clearance project. So then you'll want to see our basic economy model from Great Britain. Oh, Agnes.
If it's rather, tea is served.
You notice the very broad A. This model was only used on weekends by an old English teacher, a Mr. Chips.
I'm afraid not.
Thank you, Agnes.
Pip pip, chin up, cheerio. Pip pip, chin up, cheerio.
Then we have a fun runabout we import from France. Blanche, honey.
Oh, hello, chérie, hello.
This is Blanche Cobb.
Bonjour, mademoiselle, bonjour.
Look at that suspension. Cheek, isn't she?
Very cheeky.
And look, the engine. It's in the rear, where an engine belongs.
Thanks, but no.
Allez, Blanche. That's all.
Au revoir, au revoir, au revoir.
You mean that's all?
Well, we do have one old demonstrator model with a lot of mileage. Rosie!
Coming, sir. Here I am, sir. Yes, sir.
The old girl's still eager, isn't she? But of course, very Homely.
I may be homely, Buster, but I'm S-M-A-R-T smart.
I like her, and I'll take her.
Oh, thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
There is a one-day free home demonstration.
Oh, yes, of course. But we're not responsible for any damages to your home.
Come on, let's go home, Rose.
Yes, ma'am.
We can't guarantee her, you know.
Meet George Jetson. His boy Elroy. Daughter Judy. Jane, his wife.
Right, so Peter Thiel wrote a book and has a discussion with David Graeber about a question he raises. When we grew up, we baby boomers, we were taught and thought that we'd have flying cars and all sorts of advances in the leisure-based economy and all the rest of it. And what did we end up with? 140 characters interested in that quote, that clip from the Jetsons. It's the first episode that they're actually still using money, but they have got flying cars. The 140 characters, surveillance capitalism and the return to feudalism really isn't part of that optimistic window into the future in 1950s Hanna-Barbera America, United States. Now, that series is mentioned actually in the Great Organism book of Gary King. He also mentions Happy Days, which is one of my favourites. Another one of my favourites actually was The Wonder Years. I used to love that show. But it's a serious point on envisaging and making the future and understanding something of the limitations of the hand which is available to the oligarchs, the banksters, these are all people, that there really are very little, there's no difference between us and them. And this is a point which David Malone makes at the end of his talk on the TTIP, where he references back to the English Revolution and the diggers and Winstanley and the pamphleteers of the time, and how and part of that great tradition is also very, very clear to see in Thomas Paine's famous pamphlet Common Sense. And running through all this, it's a struggle for self-sovereignty, for the right to be left alone and pursue happiness. What is for the best? What do you want? And how do we best achieve not only our own best selves, but actually ensure that our neighbours, their neighbours, have the same self-sovereignty and right, etc. So that's that point. Right, the next point. So these guys bang on a lot about overpopulation, including Boris Johnson. Now, this is a letter of his published in the Telegraph in October 2007. And this is my essay on this question, which basically enumerates again the essential lack of argument that's actually put forward. It's an assumption which really doesn't work. And I reference Kipling's What, Why, When, How, Where, Who poem. His 6 honest serving men. Would that there were 6 in the Houses of Parliament. Would that there were 6 in Congress. Would that there were 6 in the Senate, etc. Would that there were 6 in the European Parliament, so on and so forth. So that's about defining terms, really. Heisenberg, Gödel, and Chomsky walk into a bar. Neoclassical economics is the joke. So that's going to go in the description. It's part. This is part of the palette of us from which I try to paint the picture of my understanding of the world, what's going wrong, and what we can do about it. So here we are. This is the paper Aristocracy from William III to the present day. William Cobbett against gold. Now, William Cobbett is the inspiration to that quote, the Pentecost uprising about the end of the national debt and a larger loaf of bread. And the larger loaf of bread point is to do with measurement and a standard unit, and the point about is an abstract unit of currency, which is a variable, the best way to keep an eye on those who could game and defraud the users of the system. So Mark Govin is a military theorist. Again, it's a very academic approach, and definition of terms very, very important this whole debate. So here we are. This is the famous "It's our currency but your problem" quote, which was Senator Connolly. Goes into a bit of the background of that. And then this is a paper which I did, or started some notes for a paper regarding the boundary conditions for a fiscal conservatism based on circular economics and the terror or an energy-based fiscal unit. So again, this isn't about spying on people or even on rationing. It's about actually defining terms and making sure that you get what you're bargaining for. So this is that quote there, which is in response to this. This is the full paper. Here we are. So demand for fossil fuels will decline in the near future with major macroeconomic and geopolitical consequences. And so it's an interesting paper in June 2018. But its assumptions regarding monetary measures is something which I challenge. And then here's Richard Werner's famous interview on RT, where David Buick, who's a Daily Telegraph financial reporter, his jaw hits the table when it dawns on him that Richard understands David's beloved city of London rather better than he does. The world is de-dollarizing. This is a Peter Koenig article. It's Washington with a black eye, green there. Another good article. And this is my poem, and Time, Tide, and Nature of Things Past, Tides of the Dollar Moon. That's a reading of it. I've just finished it that day and I read it. Austerity, enlargement, and monetary union, the end of European democracy, not waving but drowning. So it's another long thing that I did. Was that February 2017? This paper here was very, very good. So that's that. I'll put all these in there, and I'll be mulling over all of this stuff and reflecting on it. This diagram here is a very interesting diagram. Again, out of that Finnish paper. I won't go into that in any more depth at this stage. This is a discussion between Hugh Henry and Richard Werner regarding what I see as a central bank coup d'etat and what Richard sees as well. And it's interesting seeing a few pennies dropping for Hugh Henry as well, speaking to Richard. Putting it all together, energy, debt, war, sanctions, elitism, money, Trump, Hall, ERI. So this is an interesting Chinese paper. This graphic comes from, which is on basically embedded energy in primary, intermediary, and final consumption, looking at who actually benefits from the use of the energy, which is Del Mar said that money is a ratio. It represents a ratio between different things and a ratio between different embodied energy, and that's really the point that the technocracy people are making. And actually understanding that ratio does not lead to the conclusion that you have to ration and control through it. It gives a better understanding of what the ratios are actually representing. And if you put in money, currency as a ratio, ratio Del Mar, let's just put it here. No, I'm just gonna. I did a whole blog about that. Let's just put it in. Ratio Press on with this because if I don't get it this time, I shall put it in afterwards. My computer's being really slow, so I'm just going to do. But anyway, the ratio point's very important. Yes. February the 22nd, then came the Wolves, Jefferson and Franklin, paperless poverty. If once they become inattentive to public affairs, you and I in Congress, assemblies, judges, government shall become wolves. Now, yeah, okay, so let's just get this here. Find. Here we are, right. This from Alexander Delmar, who correctly showed that money as an expression of value was an abstract, convenient posit, see Quine 2 dogmas, and what its true substantive function is and was. Oh, come on. It is and was back then, has been recognised by people down the ages from Aristotle onwards as a mere numerical ratio. To express a numerical ratio, there is absolutely no reason to insist that any component of debt necessarily exists. So that book's on the way back machine. And this was a discussion I was having with someone, so that was a blog I did in February 2020, so it'll be in the description there. Now, this is a thing about arguing. The Perfect Storm was a paper by Dr. Tim Morgan, and he's got another one called Dangerous Exponentials, and this was a discussion with some pretty dedicated Club of Rome types. De facto bioilism. This is the denouement of my argument, really, where I'm talking about the hydrocarbon petrodollar carbon standard idea, and how that's expressed. What we mustn't do is express it as money created as debt by the money issuer. It ain't going to work. That's what isn't working right now. Then full spectrum surveillance apparatus through digital passports, Thiel, Schmidt, Assange, when Google met WikiLeaks. So that speaks to the we thought we'd have flying cars and we ended up with 140 characters. And I see Eric Schmidt has brought out a book on AI with Henry Kissinger, which is interesting. So that's that. What we've got here. Right, a bunch of Carol Quigley quotes, which aren't source. So Hitler's economic revolution in Germany had reduced financial considerations to a point where they played no role in economic or political decisions. Okay, So we're going to look at Why Hitler. Maybe that is from Why Hitler. Let's just have a look. So I'm going to read that today. Let's just do this one here. I think for whatever reason my bandwidth is going a bit off. Oh, it's 1G. I'll explain it. 2 L's and 1G. Goodness sake. Right, here we go. There are those quotes. Then we've got this Seeking Alpha James Quinn thing, who's got a blog called Burning Platform. It's a very good article. Reference there. Now, this is Martin Nowak's video on super cooperators. So this speaks to there being room for different ways of doing things, different constituencies. So super cooperators and predators do exist in the natural world, and it reduces down to a quarter, to a constant, as a natural constant, as Nowak's work shows. This is Werner Economics' YouTube channel, and I'm just going to end it there because I'm really quite tired now, and I just want to sort of have a reflect on what we're going through. So anyway, that's it for now. That's really my notes, really, for a bit more analysis. So thanks.